I am delighted to welcome you to the 2023 Winter Learning Programme, which is a series of knowledge sharing sessions on topics which you've told us you have interest in, our lovely local government partners. Yesterday, we ran a session looking at social rented homes and focusing on the assumptions, rent levels, hurdles associated with delivering social housing. Today's event is a little bit different. We're going to be getting stuck into the assumptions that dictate the viability of shared ownership housing and looking at issues such as staircasing, house price inflation, etc. Next slide, please. So the Winter Learning Programme is brought to you by Holmes England's Local Government Capacity Centre. This slide summarises who we are, what we do, and why our work is important. We launched the Capacity Centre following research and consultation with local government and a whole range of other partners to determine where local authorities need support and how best this can be delivered, and crucially, how we can help. Next slide, please. So on the slide there, you'll see a breakdown of today's session. Next, I'll be passing over to Steve Beard, who's a founding partner of Beacon Partnership and a veteran of financial modelling with over 25 years experience in housing and development and a particular penchant for appraisals, as you'll see. And at the end of the session, we'll be joined by our very own Steve Sheen, who's a senior manager in our growth team, focusing on affordable housing delivery. Next slide, please. So why affordable housing delivery and viability, and why shared ownership housing specifically? Well, these issues are some of the most requested topic areas that come up in our discussions with local government officers. As I said yesterday, we ran the social housing session, which is a bit of a sister session to this one, and we've ran that a number of times, and it's been extremely popular. I think both times that we've ran it in its current format, it's been a sellout, and lots of you have asked about shared ownership, particularly because the government has sought to encourage intermediate forms of affordable housing and routes to sustainable home ownership, and it is becoming more popular as a result of that policy choice, but also as a result of the sort of economic realities of delivering social rent and affordable rent 10 years. Because it's quite a technical and practical subject, it is ran slightly differently from our other sessions that you may have attended this week, and will take the form of a workshop focusing on the principles of a viability model, the importance of different assumptions, and key issues of interest to focus on. It's not intended that by the end of this session you'll be an expert, but rather you'll be able to understand roughly how the models work. You'll be able to interrogate appraisals and spreadsheets that come across your desk. And with professional help, you'll be able to engage more appropriately in these sorts of subject matters. As I said, there was a session yesterday. There will be some overlap inevitably because the models have a certain level of similarity, but there are some specific differences associated with today. So you will get something from today, even if you sat through yesterday's workshop. So I'm going to pass over now to Steve Beard, who will lead the workshop for the next 90 minutes or so. So, Steve, if you could share your screen and your spreadsheet, and I'll hand over to you.
Cheers. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. So I'm Steve anyway, Steve Beard. I work at Beacon. So we're a housing development regen consultancy, and I've been doing this kind of stuff, building models and working in development mainly for since the mid-90s. So I'll just share my screen. Is that my dog? It will be quiet in a minute. Right, so share, and share. Right, so hopefully that's come up, a blank screen. So what I'm going to do is basically build a shared ownership viability model from a completely blank spreadsheet, and you could try to follow along and build it yourself, but it's going to be very fast. It's very complicated shared ownership modeling. So if anyone came yesterday, this is going to involve some more complex formulas, and I'll need to go maybe into less detail to get it done. So if you're building a shared ownership scheme, the first thing you've got to do is kind of work out what you can build on the site, which sounds obvious, but in any shared ownership model, like in a rented model, you'll probably start in typing out what you want to build, you know, how many homes. So I'm going to start typing, and you can follow my mouse if you like. But you'll start with the schedule of homes, and you'll have a description, which is just going to be a description of the home. I'll make the text orange. So let's just say we've got some one beds. I'm going to put one bed flats actually. One bed flats and some 2-bed flats. I'll leave the rest blank. And at the bottom we'll have a row to add everything up as we go. So this will be very much like yesterday for a few minutes, and then we'll say how many homes there are. So number of homes. And let's just say there's 10 1-beds and 14 2-beds. So again, I can color them here in orange. And you have to say how big they are. So we'll have a net internal area. So this will be how big they are in square meters. It's not that relevant. It's only really relevant the area inside if you want to enter your works cost per square meter. So let's just put in some sizes. I'll put the absolute minimums for the space standards. So these are assuming a 1-bed 2-person flat and a 2-bed 4-person flat. So that's the minimum size they're allowed to be. And then I'll add these up actually quick. So if I want to add up the number of homes, I click auto sum up here. So that should add up and come to 24 when I press enter. Yep, 24. And to add up the internal area, I have to use this formula called sum product, which is going to add and multiply these two rows together. So if I do that, so we've got 1,480 square meters. What you'll also have, because they're flats, is you'll have some circulation space. So this will be an allowance for hallways, like communal hallways, communal stairs, lifts, and stuff like that. So I'll just put in an amount. So the amount is normally expressed as a percentage of the internal area. So in this case, this I've assumed 25%. So if I add those two together, I get this gross area, which would be the internal area, the 50 square meters, which is behind the front door, times 1 plus the 25%. So the total area basically you'd need to build to make this flat livable would be 62.5 square meters. Obviously, you've got to get to it. So I can add these gross areas up to find out how big is the building in total, and it's 1850. I'll just make these gray. So that's kind of as far as the link is going to go with yesterday. If anyone was here, and we're going to start kind of going into things that are a bit more shared ownership specific. So the next thing you'll need to do is the full open market value. So what is it? What is it worth? Let's put the word market in there. So the full open market value. So what are these homes worth when they're built? So I'd say 260,000 and 330. I mean, obviously, it's going to differ wherever they are. Again, I'll color them orange. So orange will be inputs, because people can take this model afterwards. I think it could be sent out, but an orange cell is an input, and we typically lock all of the other ones. If I drag the cell along at the bottom, we get a total. So we can see that this site, when built, is worth 7.22. So if it was private sale, that is how much we could sell the homes for. But because we're looking at shared ownership, which obviously means you buy a share of the property, you have to tell the model what is the initial sale. So what percentage are people going to buy? Now, the initial sale is, I think, allowed to be anywhere from, it was 25% upwards to 75, but now it's, I think, down to 10%. So, people can buy a very small share. But I think for this model, just for training, I would assume that people buy 25% initially. And we'll play about with this if we get time at the end. You might think selling more up front is actually better than less, but it might not be the case. So the next part we have is the retained equity. So after you've sold the homes, what have you got left? And this will be a formula. Like, so what percentage do you have, or what value do you have left? So the amount you'd have left would be the full market value multiplied by 75%, because you're keeping 75%. So I'll put that in. So you would retain 195 here. So I'll drag that down. So yeah, we've got 260 here for the 1-bed flat. We've sold 25%, and we still own 195,000 worth. If I drag this along at the bottom, the total, I just need to change the formula in the bottom here. This one here. So what we've got left is what we started with, less what we've sold. So we've sold 1.8 million worth, and we've kept 5.4 million. That's kind of that's dealing with, like, what happens at the start, like what do we sell. But obviously, because it's shared ownership in England anyway, there's a rent amount. So people have to pay rent on the bit they don't own, and they don't get to keep it for free. I think typically people use the term shared equity if they don't pay any rent, but with shared ownership in England, there is a rent on the part you don't own. So we would have a rent percentage. And what the way they work the rent out on shared ownership is this 195 here. So the 2-bed flat, the owners bought 25% of it, which is 65,000. So they've got a mortgage for 65,000, and the housing association or council still own 195,000 worth, and they pay a rent on this part they don't own. And the way the rent is calculated is it's a percentage of this. And I'm going to put in 2.75. There's guidance on what the rent should be. I think in London, the maximum is 2.75, and I think outside of London, the average is 2.75. So I think it can go up to 3%. But they would pay effectively 2.75% of this amount every year. So the rent per year, or the first year, because it does go up with inflation, but the rent in the first year, oops, I've messed that up, is going to be the 195 times the 2.75. So the rent per year on this flat is 5,362 per year, which I think if there's 52 weeks per year, it's about £100 a week rent. They got a mortgage for 65,000, and they pay about £100 a week rent as well. That's let me just finish this bit off. That is the schedule. You'll need to fill this in if you're doing shared ownership. So you wouldn't really need to tell it anything else. I'll just tidy it up a bit because it gets sent out afterwards. So yeah, that is where you fill this in, and then you'll start to say, well, what's it going to cost, and what grant do I need, and the rest of the model will work that out. But you have this schedule, and the kind of key things you need to get right with shared ownership is one is the values. If you kind of get them hopelessly wrong, you're going to massively underestimate or overestimate how it's going to work. And you need to have an idea of what rent is affordable, which I'll come on to at the end if we have some time. So yeah, I've finished that part. So the next part, which is going to be very similar to the rented model yesterday, is what's it going to cost to build. So we'll have I kind of call it capital cost, but it's our upfront cost. Should put an S on the end of that, shouldn't I? But so we'll have acquisition costs, so like any land we need to buy. And I think in this one we'll assume it's say 20,000 per home for the land, so that would be 480,000. I'll make that cell orange because it'll be something that you type in. And then we'll have works cost, like our build cost. So what's it going to cost our contractor to build? And normally this will be an amount per square meter. I mean, you can type it in as a lump sum as well in most models. So, but we'll say an amount per square meter. So I'm assuming here 2,700 to build it. We'll assume that's somewhere, outside of London. Build costs are quite higher now. So, and the amount of square meters will be this gross area, because you've obviously got to build all this circulation space here where my mouse is. So you've got your net area 1,480. You've got all this circulation space, and the total area is 1,850. So that will be what we multiplied the build cost per square meter by. And then we'll have everything on top, which is on cost. So everything on top of land and works cost. And normally, like for a very quick model, this will be a percentage of the acquisition and the build cost. In this model, I'm going to use 30%. If anyone was here yesterday, I think I used a much lower percentage, but with shared ownership, you've got more cost on top of land and build cost. So you've got to do quite a lot of marketing. You've got sales agents' fees. You've got to pay a valuer when the units are finished to value them before you can sell them. You've got the conveyancing packs and sales packs to put together. You might have a show flat and furniture going in there. So there's quite a bit more. So rather than a rate like a 20, 22, 23%, up a bit higher here. So that's all your cost, and I can do a total cost thing and add these up. So again, I'm adding up these three numbers. So to build this scheme is costing us 7.1 million. So let me just tidy this up. This doesn't really tell us anything really about viability at the moment, but what we can kind of see, if I just zoom out, is the scheme is worth 7.22 and our cost are 7.11. So it's costing us less to build than what it's worth. If this was private sale and all of the costs and that were the same, we would make a profit of this amount here, this open market value less our cost. So if it's private sale, we'd only make 100,000, which isn't very much to spend 7 million. Not many people would spend 7 million to make 100,000. It's quite risky. Probably get that back if you stuck 7 million in the bank. So, but that's kind of a quick comparison to how would a private sale work in this scenario. I think the reality is with private sale, you wouldn't even make that, because with private sale, you'd probably have a seal payment and maybe more marketing fees because it's harder to sell. So anyway, yeah, let's carry on. So that's the cost. Underneath that, I'm going to put like how we're going to pay for it. So we'll have kind of like, I'll call it capital funding. But where does the money come from to pay for this? So this is looking at kind of capital funding. So the first part is grant, and I'll just put, say, Holmes England in brackets. And I'm just going to write the word here, so because we're going to use this later, it's recoverable grant. So when I say recoverable, I mean that you have to pay it back if you sell the homes. Not when you sell them initially, but if you sell 25% of the home, and 10 years later the occupant goes and buys the other 75%. At that point in time, you've got to repay the grant you had on that home back to the Holmes England, or recycle it onto another scheme. And that means that you can't use that grant to pay back any debt you had. So basically, there's two types of grant, and the recoverable grant is repaid when people buy further shares or recycled into other projects. So I'm going to put an amount here of, say, 30,000 per unit grant. So our total would be 30,000 multiplied by this number up here, number of homes. So we've got 24 homes. So we'd have a grant of 720,000 there. So that's our grant from Holmes England. The other option nowadays is grant, like right to buy receipts for councils if you've got them, and that's non-recoverable. So at the moment, with the right to buy grant rules, if you fund shared ownership with right to buy and someone buys the rest, you don't have to pay it back. I can't see anything in the rules that says you need to do that. So the grant on shared ownership for right to buy, if you put right to buy 1-for-1 receipts, so it's money you've had from selling council homes, is allowed at 40% of cost. So if you was to use this grant and then multiply it by total cost, it's much higher than what 30,000 would be from Holmes England. And I think roughly this would need to be something like 120,000 per home to be similar. So if you've got right to buy grant and you use it on shared ownership, it's quite a lot of funding going in compared to what you would get from Holmes England. But we're going to start with Holmes England grant on this today. The other way you're going to pay for this 7 million is you're going to have some money when you sell the first part. So sales income, and this is like initial sale only. So I'll type that in. And the money we're going to get when we sell them is this column G, this initial sale up here. It was 1.8 million. So we'll get that in. We get this money through the door. You know, once the tenants have got the keys, we've had this amount of money. And the rest we need to borrow. So we'll have long-term borrowing. So our long-term borrowing will be the total cost less these grants and sales income. So we borrow the rest. So it costs 7.1 million. We get 720 grant. We get 1.8 million in sales, and we borrow the rest. And if I add these up, it should come to the same amount as the cost. Yeah, it does. So that's our total funding. So that's kind of similar to the rented model. The difference is you've got the sales income, really. That's the main thing, the main difference. So that's the easy part. And now this gets going to get really complicated, because what we have to work out is we're borrowing 4.5 million, which I'll color in green, to build this scheme. Like, that's after we've got our sales income. We're left with this property we own at 5.4 million, but we're not getting that as sales income because they don't have to buy that. But we're getting this rent of 53,000 a year. And what the model needs to work out is, does this 53,000 a year pay back this debt? Will it pay it back, and will the scheme, you know, wash its own face, so for want of a better term? And to work it out is really complicated, and that's what I'm going to try and do. And I hope I can manage to get through this, because this is going to be quite tricky. There's lots of assumptions you need to make, much more than what's it called, social rent. So you have a table of financial assumptions about what happens to the rent and your management cost, etc. So let's put another table in and start to fill in the assumptions. So the first
Steve,
thing, yes.
Do we need to add in the rent for the 2-bed flats?
Oh, yep. Let's put that in. Well spotted. There we are.
Few people on the chat mentioning it, so I thought I'd mention.
Yes, I missed that. There we are. So yeah. So the question is, does this rent of 148? I would have bought one of them flats if I'd known it was rent free, but I wouldn't have had the money. But anyway, yeah, 148. Does the 148 rent pay back the long-term loan? So anyway, we need to make these assumptions. So management cost per unit or per home, whatever you want to call it. We'll need to make an assumption on what is our management cost per home. And for shared ownership, people tend to use quite a low cost. Sometimes people don't put in any cost because the shared owners are leaseholders and there's a lease agreement. And then under that lease agreement, in theory, you could recover all your management cost as a charge, you know, as a service charge. But some people think they aren't going to recover all of it. So, I mean, there's certainly a management cost in getting the tenants in there and showing them how the property works and stuff like that. But anyway, there's a management cost per unit, which we'll put in as £100 in this model. But it's normally quite a nominal amount of money. Now, these days, which is quite new, you've got a maintenance contribution. Until quite recently with shared ownership, the way it kind of worked is, you know, the shared owners buy 25% or whatever percent they buy, and they're responsible for all the maintenance behind the front door. They're certainly responsible for their kitchens and bathrooms, and anything that needs doing on the building, they pay for as a leaseholder, like you would if you was 100% leaseholder. But now they changed it so that in the first like 10 years, effectively, you know, the landlord has to make a contribution towards the maintenance, or but it's capped, and it's gone up, I think, slightly now, but it was capped at £500 per home per year. So £500 of the maintenance, if they had to say do some work on the lift or that, you would get a contribution towards that from the landlord. So that's a cost to the landlord. So it goes in as a cost here. You have like a maintenance period. So I said 10 years, and that's what will go in this cell. So so you'll pay this £500 towards maintaining the homes for a 10-year period. So that's in years. And that's kind of there's one more bit of operational cost, which is bad debts. Voids is a tricky one on shared ownership, but in theory, you shouldn't have any voids or bad debts. And I'm kind of quite in favour of just leaving it empty in the model, because they're, you know, if they don't pay their rent, you've got a charge on the property, and you can pick them and claim back the lost rent, you know, when they go. So, but some people do allow voids and bad debts figure. I'll put 1% in. Say everyone's a bit different on this. I'll call it voids and bad debts. But I think if you really looked at it, probably a way to avoid it. We've got voids and bad debts, and then there's a load more assumptions we need to make that we wouldn't normally need to make on rented homes. So one is property inflation, because they might buy more percentages of the home. You know, they're allowed to. So you need to know, or you're never going to know, but you need to make an assumption of how's the property going to go up in value over time. So I'll put in here 3%. So we'll assume like a 3% growth. We also need to say how fast the rent's going to go up. And again, I'll use 3%. So the rent in this property here, this one bed flat, is 5,363 in the first year they move in. The next year it goes up by 3%. That's quite different to having a 100% mortgage. I mean, if you think about it, if you get a mortgage and you buy your own home, your mortgage never goes up. I mean, it would go up if interest rates went up, but if interest rates never changed, your mortgage would never change in the whole 30 years. You know, it would be the same price. And obviously, as you earn more money and inflation, the mortgage gets less and less. But with shared ownership, it's different. With the rent, it goes up every year. So you've got to earn more and more each year to pay the rent. So you've got cost inflation as well. I'm just going to move that one down and put cost inflation here. Keep it next to property inflation and cost inflation. So this is your management cost and maintenance cost inflation. What's that? And we've put 3% in there. So there's some quite obvious assumptions, but in shared ownership, there's a really big assumption, which is to do with something called staircasing. So when people buy 25% initially, they might buy further shares, and when they buy further shares, that's called staircasing for some reason. I assume because they're going up a ladder towards full ownership. So they call it staircasing, and you buy a bit more each year. The thing is with shared ownership, it's voluntary. It doesn't have to happen. So if you're building shared ownership as like an investor or a social landlord, you need to decide: are you going to assume whether staircasing happens? Yes or no. So in most models, you'll have a switch, and I'm just going to do this data validation and say allow a list. So I'm going to say like yes or no. Is there staircasing? Yes or no. And when I whoops, didn't want to do that. If I make that green, so orange, yeah. So if I say is there staircasing? Yes or no. And in this model, we're going to assume that yes, there is going to be some staircasing. So we'll assume that the owners buy further shares in the property. The next thing we'll need to assume is when does it start? So, does it start the day they move in, or does it start 10 years in the future? What I'm going to assume is a 6 year. Starts in year 6. And then we're going to say, when does staircasing end? So staircasing end year. So we need to say, when does it stop? And I put year 40. So let me just drag this down here. So let's assume it stops in year 40. And there's one more kind of assumption with staircasing. How much of the rest of the home are they going to buy? Are they going to buy just another half of it, or are they going to buy all of the rest? So are they going to staircase up to 100%, which would be full ownership, or are they going to staircase up to say 80%? And most people would, assume, if they are assuming staircasing, probably it's anywhere from sort of 60, 70% to 100%. The risk is with 100% that you're relying on them buying all of it. And it's unlikely that every owner is going to buy all of their property over the time period, So that probably is enough for the first. There's two more assumptions to make about the loan, but these assumptions here will help us build the cash flow. But before we build the cash flow, there's some calculations that I'm going to do fairly quick because they're a bit, what's it called? They're not really that relevant to understanding how it works. But the first thing you need to know, though, is what's the initial sale percentage? And the initial percentage sold is this 1805 divided by the 7.2 million. So it's 25%. So we need to know that in the model. You have to have this formula in the model because in reality, you might have 30% on the 2 beds, or actually be less. It'd be a higher percentage on the smaller units, and you need this weighted average of what's been sold altogether. So yeah, you need to know what's been sold as a percentage, and then you need to know what is retained as a percentage, which is quite simple. It's 100% minus the 25, so you've retained 75, and then we need to know the staircasing percent. So how much more do they buy from what they already had? And then I'm going to put in here is if staircasing is yes, which is this, if that equals yes, then they're going to staircase the staircasing ceiling. So 100% less, what is it? Less the initial sale. Yes, that's right. So the staircasing percentage is 75% in this case, which makes sense. We're saying they're going to buy all of it. If I drop the staircasing ceiling to 90% here, so we say they're only going to staircase up to 90%, then the staircasing is only 65 because they already own 25 and they buy another 65, which takes it to 90. So that's that formula there. Then we have a staircasing period. So how long are they staircasing over? Like how many years? And that staircasing period is the end minus the start. So that's how many years. You have to add 1. That's 35-year period between 6 and 40. So it's over 35 years. And then there's just 2 more, and we build the cash flow to see if that rent pays back that loan. So we have a staircasing percent per year. So how much do they staircase per year? Staircasing percent PA, and this is an amount of the whole property. So again, I'm just going to put if the staircasing is on, which is this switch over my assumptions. If the staircasing is yes, so if that equals yes, that equals yes, then where is it? The staircasing amount there is divided by the number of years, which is there, which is 35. Yeah, so we're saying if they staircase, it's 75% divided by 35, and if it's not, it's 0, and that's a percentage. So we should have the staircasing 2.14% per year. So that 2.14 over 35 years will staircase 75% out. But what what that 2.14% is a percentage of the whole home. And if you want to work out what percentage did they staircase of the bit they didn't buy, so I'll finish with this bit in a minute and we'll get back to something else. It will be the staircasing per year divided by what was retained. It's a higher percentage, basically. This is a bit of a tricky thing with shared ownership, but the percentage they buy each year as a percentage of the whole home is less than the percentage they buy of the bit that was just retained by the landlord, because it's a bigger percent of a smaller amount, if you see what I mean. But yeah, I've done that bit now. That was the tricky bit that I thought would lose people, and it may well have done. But that's just kind of the calculations that feed into the back of the model. And what we can do now is start to build the cash flow to see, like, does this rent, so does our money, our 1489 up here, I might have to zoom out a bit actually, yeah, does our rent, this 148 in green, does that pay for this loan in green down here? And now we can start to work it out and build a cash flow that we'll show you. So what we need to do is have an operational cash flow. Let's start it here. And out basically is what money do we have, coming in over however long we want to build it. So you'll start with a year. Let me just make some of this grey so it's clear that that's the heading line. So we'll start with a year, and we'll start with year 1 in this instead of year 0. So I'm just going to drag this just down to year 3. Oops, that should be 3. So yeah, we've got a year. So year 1, year 2, year 3. And what we want to have in our first one is the value of the property, which is not really relevant in rented homes. And the value of the property in year 1, and this is the value of the property retained by the landlord, is this 5.4 million. We've already got our 1.8 million is in, and the value of the property that we still own is 5415. In year 2, that value will go up by 1 plus the property inflation, the 3%. So in year 2, our property has gone up to 577, and if I drag that down, I can see in year 3 it's 544. So we've got that value, and we've got our full rent payable. So the rent payable in year 1 is this 148913, and in year 2 it will be that amount times 1 plus rent inflation, which is here 3%. So in year 2, the rent's gone up to 153,380, and in year 3 it goes up again. And if there was no staircasing, it'd be quite easy to build the model. You could just basically drag this, just drag this rent down, and that's what they pay, and you take off management maintenance cost, and you get this net income stream. But there's the staircasing complexity. So we have to have a staircasing, I'm going to put staircasing equals 1. So if it's a year where there's staircasing, I want the model to give me what's it called, a 1. So I have to put a formula in here. It's quite complicated. So it's an if and. So I'm saying to the model, if something happens and something else happens. So I'm saying if the staircase start year, so if year 6 is less than or equal than this A27, our year we're in, this is year 1. So if the start year is below that, and if also the end year is greater or equal than the first year, so it'll make sense what I've done in a second. If those two things are both true, then give me a 1, and if not, give me a 0. You can see in my formula, that's what I've typed. I think this is going to work. So there's a 0 in year 1, because it's not a staircasing year, because they don't start staircasing in year 1. And if I drag this down, they're all zeros. let me drag this down. I'm going to drag this down to 60 years now. I can, whoops, that didn't work. Let me just do it this way. I never work out why Excel sometimes does it, sometimes doesn't. I got to go down to year 60. So we've got a 60-year cash flow, and I can drag all of these down to year 62. I should have some ones. There they are. So I've got a 1 from year 6, and I've got all these ones. There's staircasing happening, and it's stopping in year 40. So that's what you'll have in a shared ownership model. I mean, it's a bit just basic Excel kind of modeling, not that interesting, but that's what it will show. So is there staircasing in these years? And what we'll have here is a staircasing percent. And what happens is if there's staircasing, it will, if there's a 1 here, we want the model to basically take off the amount that's staircased, which I think is in there in J16. So if I press F4, fix that. So when I drag this down, I should start to get another column of numbers, and let me just expand that out. So yeah, every year here, you're going to have this amount of staircasing, and I can then use this to start kind of adjusting how much is owned. So what happens when people staircasing is they start to pay less rent. But in year 1, there's never staircase in year 1. People pay what percentage? They pay 100% in year 1. And if they do staircasing, the rent comes down by the amount that they buy. So if I drag this down now, what you'll see, you see like they start to pay 100. They're paying 100% of the rent in year 5, but in year 6 they start to buy a bit more. So you're saying, oh, they're going to buy 2.86%. So therefore the rents come down by 94%. So I'll drag this down, and you'll see by the time they get to year 40, there's no rent. You know, in year 40 they've bought it. You know, they don't pay any rent. So I can now start to actually put in the money that the RP will get, or the council, or profit RP. So gross rent. This is the money paid. So in year 1, what's it called? In year 1, it would be the full rent payable multiplied by, you know, the percentage they have to pay. So that's quite straightforward. And this rent goes up with inflation. So as I drag it down to here, their rent's going up every year. It's going up quite a lot, by what, £5 a year. But once they start staircasing, the rent sort of stops going up, basically. And if I drag this down, you'll see this is the income that the landlord gets. You can see as they're staircasing, the rent's going up by 3%, and they're buying 2.86%. So it's pretty much even at first. Like they're buying a percentage that's equal to the rent increase. So but over time, as they own less, the rent that you're getting comes down. So that's what your rent will look like if you're the landlord. You know, it goes up and up, and when they start staircasing, it starts to go down. But what obviously you do get is the staircasing receipt. So when they buy other parts of the property, you get that, and the amount that you get is the value of the property multiplied by the staircasing percent. So it'll be 0 here. Make that smaller. So you start to get these receipts, and they're big. You know, the staircasing receipts are quite big, especially if you've got higher property inflation. They just keep going up and up. But let's drag that down. So you've got these big staircasing receipts coming in. because you're saying from year 6 to year 40, they're buying like 3% of the home. So that's our money coming in. It's these two things, but there are there's sort of some money going out that we need to put in. So the first one coming out is the management cost, and I've spelled that wrong. I'm just going to put management cost. So the management cost is basically is equals. So I need to say if. So this is tricky again. So if the rent, because we need it to stop. So if the rent is greater than 0, so if they're still renting it, we want to charge management. If the rent is greater than 0, then our management cost is £100 a unit. It's that times the number of homes, there's 24. So if there's any rent payable, charge £100 a unit, or otherwise nothing. So that's 2,400. And in year 2, it's kind of the same, but it's what have I done here? Let me just build it again, actually, another way. So in year 2, it's like if the rent is greater than 0, then the amount you would pay is the amount last year times inflation, because it goes up. So it goes up with this cost inflation up here. So yeah, if the rent's 0, charge the last year's rent plus a bit more for inflation, and if the rent is 0, don't charge anything. And I can, where is it? I can drag this down. So you should see you'll have a rent going out now. Make it currency. So yeah, our rent keeps going up and up, and once they bought all of it, there's our management costs keep going up and up. And once they bought all of it, we've got no management cost anymore, because at that point we don't own it. We've got nothing to do with the building, in theory. So that's management cost, and some people will reduce management cost as they staircase. So you could say, well, if there's staircasing, you've got less management cost. Some people do, some people don't. The maintenance contribution, which is limited, is £500 a unit times the number of homes. So in year 1, it's 12,000. So it's quite a lot. But then you need to say we need to put in a formula again for this to basically go up with the 10-year period. So the formula again is telling these if and. We need a few things to be true. So we're going to say if where is it? If the rent in year 2 is greater than 0, we're going to have a management charge. And if the year is let me think this through, less than or equals to the maintenance period. Where is it? Here, this year 10. So we're going to stop it at year 10. So if those two things are true, then it should be the previous year's maintenance, and we're going to add on inflation, 1 plus cost inflation up here. And if not, 0. And I think, have I missed off? Yeah, that's fine. And I can drag this down, and it will add our maintenance cost. It's very detailed, this. I hope some people still listening. So we've got our maintenance cost here for 10 years. And the reason I'm building the model like this is we can change these inputs. Once this is built, I can start saying, well, what happens if the maintenance period is only 5 years? Or, there's only 2 more, and then we can get on to see, does the scheme actually work? The other thing is reclaimed grant. So you've got to repay the grant if there's staircasing. So the reclaimed grant is so it's this staircasing amount multiplied by what's it called? The staircasing amount multiplied by this recoverable grant. And that would take that out. Drag that down. I think that should work. Yeah. So if I drag this to the bottom, like this 27.1, just to show you, if I add that up, well, it's added it up. If you can see down here, it comes to 720,000. That is this grant. It's being repaid, the 720, because it's recoverable, and we've got full staircasing. So once the whole thing's bought by year 40, you've repaid all your grant. So that's that. And there's only one more, which is the easiest one, thank God, which is voids and bad debts. So you will have a percentage for voids and bad debts, potentially 1%. So that 1% is of this rent here, this gross rent. You're losing that rent there. So I can drag that down. And then I'll put in the last column, which will be what have we got? You know, what have we got? Our net income. Can't really call it net rent because it's not all rent, it's sales income as well. So our income is our rent and staircasing. Less, I didn't put them in as minuses. All these, you know, management costs, maintenance costs, reclaim grant, voids and bad debts. And that gives us our income. And I can drag that down. And I'll drag this all the way to the bottom. And I'm pleased I've got there because this is quite tricky to remember. So what we now know is this borrowing in green that we've got, 4.5 million. This is our money to pay it back. And I'm going to colour this green as well because this is our key kind of line here. This is what money we've got. You know, that profile is our income profile. And if I just zoom out, I just want to show you something. You can see it's like 133, 137, 141, and it, you know, when we get to year 6 here, it's 308. There's a massive jump up, and that's because there's staircasing. And basically, if you assume staircasing, models work a lot better. You know, it's worth money to the organization. If I turn staircasing off, so this is the staircasing box. If I change that to no, I haven't got that jump here in year 6 to 300,000. I'm still getting the 150, you know, 160, because I've got no staircasing. If I look at my profile, this column is empty because the rent's just going up. Whereas when I've got staircasing receipt, I'm getting these big lumps of money coming in. So let's see how the model works now. So we're going to do a loan. Does this pay back the loan? So this is quite easy compared to the bit we've just done now. So this is our loan calculation. So our opening loan, I'll do it as a minus, is this 4592. So that, if you remember, the scheme cost 7.1, we got 720 in grant, and we got 1.8 million in sales. So we've borrowed 4.5 mil. So that's our opening loan calculation. Just going to make this section go red numbers for negative. So that's our loan, and then we have an interest cost, and that's our last kind of 2 assumptions really. So we've got a cash flow period for our MPV, and we've got an interest rate, or also called a discount rate, and I won't spend that much time on this time explaining what they are. So let's assume our cash flow period is 40 years, and we'll have an interest discount rate of, I'm going to use 6%. So we're going to assume a 6% discount rate. You know, that discount rates on shared ownership is a bit tricky because you know, some people have really low ones. I think they are tending to go up a bit. But our interest cost on this loan in year 1 is the amount we've borrowed times by the discount rate. So, you know, we've got a an interest cost of 275, and our net income is 133. I'm going to make this green again because it's and then we've got a closing loan. We should say balance. I don't know if it fits in or not, but that's our closing loan balance. And our closing loan balance is basically what we started with. We paid this interest and we've got this income, and it's actually gone up a bit like with the rented. The income is not enough to cover the interest, so we have to borrow more money effectively. So at the start of year 2, we've now got 4.7 million owed. I'm just going to quickly put another column here so I can see the year. So yeah, in year 2, we've got 284 interest now. It's gone up because we owe more money. And I can drag down our income because that's just pointing to this green column over here. So our income's gone up and our loan has gone up again. And basically, should be able to drag that down a bit. What you can see is that the income doesn't cover the interest, but it starts to get close. Once you've got staircase in, it's easily doing it. And then we'll just drag this down to the end of year 60. So do we pay back our loan, yes or no? And you can kind of see here, year 40, let me color this in pink for now. In year 40, we have paid back our loan because the staircase in receipts get higher and higher because property value is going up. So yeah, we get to year 40 and our opening loan balance, well, we'd already paid it off at the end of year 39. So in year 39, we only owed 369. The interest was really low at 22, and we got 460,000 in. So the loan was repaid. So this is a scheme as populated. You would say it watches its own face in loan terms. You know, it pays back its loan. We've got these big staircase in receipts. This column here where my mouse is, these big numbers are our staircase in receipts. So that's the loan calculation. I'm now going to quickly do net present value, and once I've done it, I can just go over it a bit more slowly because it will work as a model, and we can start to see what makes shared ownership kind of massively viable or unviable, right? Which numbers have the big impact. Net present value again. So first of all, we've got the year. 1. So in year 1, we get net income. So in year 1, it's the same column here. We're getting this this money's coming in, and let me just drag this down. So we're getting the same amount of money, you know, coming in. But with a net present value calculation, I'll go over this a bit. What a net present value calculation does is it kind of accounts for all this interest cost effectively by taking the interest cost off of your income. It sounds a bit strange, but we have a discount rate of an interest rate is the same as the discount rate in this example, so of 6%. So our cost of borrowing money is 6%. And what you can do is, instead of adding 6% off onto the amount you borrow, you can take 6% off of your rent, and that will give you the same kind of answer. So to take 6% off of this rent, I need to divide 1 by 1.06, and I need to do that once. And there's a 1 in this cell here. So if I take off 0.6% of the rent, I need to take off times it by 0.94366, and that would be that times that. So what we get is this is technically called a discount factor. So the 6% is the discount rate there. The discount factor is how much you need to take off. And this here is the present value, I'm going to say, of the net income. So our income at the end of a year is worth, 6% less effectively. It's not exactly 6 here because you're starting with the bigger number, but if I multiplied this by 6, I think I get to that. Anyway, I'll just drag this down, and what you'll see is every year you take off another 6%. So the amount you take off gets basically bigger and bigger, and you multiply your income in the future by this amount. And what that's doing is it's keeping this amount of money. So like year 8, this 317, that's what you're going to get in year 8. But today, that 317 is only worth 199 because you took 6% off for every year that's passed. So that's what your money is worth now. And I can, I'll drag this down to year 60. So you can see over time our income is this column here. If I go down the years, it gets less and less and less because as every year passes, you're taking off another 6%. So our 469,000 here we're going to get in year 40. That's our rent and staircase in receipt. That amount there is only worth 45,000 in today's money. And once we get to year 41, there's nothing, because in year 41 we're assuming at the moment in this that the occupiers bought the whole scheme and we've got nothing left whatsoever. So that kind of is the net present value thing. The last thing is to do is just to add it up like cumulatively, because every year that passes, your income is worth all of the preceding years. So we'll call this cumulative present value. So in year 2, if I go here, we've got 247 because we've got the 125 and the 121. And if I just keep dragging it, I'm basically adding up a new year. Every year I'm adding up the total we've had so far plus the next year. And this is what our income stream is worth as we go forward. This is what in today's values. Once we get to year 40, we're at 4645. So that is what our income is worth when we get to the end of the cash flow effectively. So because our income's worth that much in today's values, that's kind of what we can afford to borrow. That's kind of how that works. We can, this is what it's worth now, so we can afford to borrow that because we've basically adjusted what the income's worth by 6%, which is the same as our cost of borrowing. I've probably lost a few people, but I'll try and get people back. So the last bit of the model before we start playing around with it is net present value results. So to do the net present value, we have our borrowing, which we've already got. That's our 4592 here. That's what we're borrowing. Then we have what I call, the present value. The present value of our rents, what is our rents worth? And what I need to tell the model to do is tell me what the rents are worth at the year we're choosing. So if I say this is my column of numbers, goes to 60, what I want it to do is pick which one we're going for. And in the assumptions page, just quickly did it earlier, it says cash flow period, and it says 40. So I want it to say, I don't know why that's selected the wrong cell. Let me just, if it's year 40, tell me what the present value is here, this cumulative one. Like what's our rent, what's our income stream worth when it gets to year 40? And what that formula will do, I'll press enter. That's what our income is worth, this figure here, which is 4625. And the net present value is basically the difference between what our income's worth and what we need to borrow. So it's the income. The income's worth 4645, and the borrowing's 4592. So our net present value is 52,000, which that means this scheme works. It's making a surplus. Our income is worth more than our borrowing cost. So that if you was presented with this scheme as a standalone shared ownership scheme and asked, does this scheme pay for itself? You would say yes, because the income we get is worth more than we borrow. I'll just show one thing that I showed yesterday, which if people on there know what's coming. But let me just freeze this and go down a bit. You freeze panes. So I just want to look at year 40. If we've got the loan, we're left with in year 40 a closing like surplus of 542. This cell, which I'll make it bright yellow. So we're left with this 542. That's what we're left with in year 40. We're left with 542, and our net present value figure. I'll just go up and find it. It's there, 52,000. I'm just going to put equals, and this figure here, which I'll make this bright blue. That's our net present value. These two figures are the same amount of money. The only difference is this is how much money the project makes over its 40 years. The only difference, why? So I say they're the same amount of money. Obviously, they're not when you look at them, but they're the same amount of money expressed in different points in time. So the project makes 542,000 over its lifetime, and that's what you end up with in year 40. That 542 that you end up in year 40 is only worth 52,000 now. So we've made a profit of 542,000 at the end of 40 years, but today that 542 is only worth 52,000. And if I use this discount factor, this 0.97, that's what 6%. If you take 6% off of something for 40 years, that's what it's worth. And if I just up here, if I multiply the 542, our loan balance, by the 0.97, I get that NPV figure. You know, that there, that's the same. That's the NPV. So you can kind of see the NPV as your closing loan balance, but in in today's values. And another way to look at it, if I was to take the NPV and our interest rate is 6%, 1.06. If I multiply that 40 times, which is this formula, 1.06, that's 6% interest for 40 years. Money in the future is worth 10.28 times more than it is now in 40 years. And if I multiply the current surplus by that 6% in year, I get to this 542, which is this 542 down here. So kind of for people that struggle with NPV, I kind of would say it's what you're left with at the end of paying for your scheme and covering your interest. It's what you're left with, but it's expressed as today's money. And over 40 years, it's 10 times less, because money is going to go up by 10 times if it's going up by 6% a year for 40 years. So yeah, that's kind of that's the model built. What I want to do is we've got 25 minutes, actually quite a long time. So I want to kind of start playing around with numbers and see what makes this scheme work. So what we can do is all these calculations down here that I've done, they're all automatic now. We don't need to look at them, so we can ignore all that. And the model is actually quite small. It's just, where am I going? It's just this part here, and it's only the orange cells. So if I put a big, let's put a great big dark box around it. When you've got a viability model, you have just these orange cells to play with. So we can start to look at, how does shared ownership compare to private sale? What I'm going to do is put private sale. I'll call it profit. I know people like to use the word surplus. I'll be honest about it and call it profit. But if you had this scheme for private sale, you would have your open market value. This is the receipt, 5.2 million, less the cost. So if it's for private sale, our profit is 102,000, and if it's shared ownership profit these here because this is going to be quite interesting. If it's shared ownership profit, it's the MPV is effectively, you know, your profit is 52,000. I want to kind of keep an eye on these two numbers, and we're going to start playing around with some of these assumptions because at the moment, like, you can't, you know, assuming this is all fixed, you can look at different types of funding, etc., and it will affect the shared ownership. Like, you can change the shared ownership by changing assumptions. Private sale, you can't really do anything with. You know, it costs you what it costs to build, and it's worth what it's worth. There's not very much you can change. So the first thing I want to do is look at what happens if we switch to grant to right to buy. So what will happen if we push the grant up? We need to borrow less money, you know, because the borrowing is the difference between cost and grant. So if I take the grant out completely, the 30,000, which is the Holmes England grant, you can see over here that the shared ownership now has got a negative MPV. It's losing 444 because we haven't got any grant. If we got 40% right to buy grant into our shared ownership, I need to make this bigger. We've made a £2.4 million surplus compared to, and that is compared to private sale is huge. I do think, like, in terms of people with struggling programs, like if you've got right to buy receipts and you want to put them on shared ownership, then it's basically too much grant. You know, you don't need that much grant. But if you're allowed to use it and you decide to use it that way, it's going to make you a surplus, assuming you have staircasing in that, because you've just basically added 2.8 million of grant. You're now only borrowing 2.46. If we look down here, like at the present value thing, our borrowing is 2,465, and the value of our income stream is worth 4.8. That's why there's a profit now of 2.4. If I take the grant out here, you see this present value didn't change. You know, this 4,868 grant doesn't affect, if grant isn't repayable, it doesn't affect what you're getting from your rent and staircasing. You know, so I can put in right to buy grant. This 486 stays the same. I can put in 40% right to buy grant, and I'm borrowing 2.8 million less now. So I'm basically making this huge surplus. So I think that what this kind of demonstrates is that shared ownership can outperform private sale. You know, if you put loads of grant in. I mean, and obviously, like, Holmes England aren't going to give 40% grant on shared ownership because it doesn't need it to work. You know, so it would be like over provision of public subsidy. But yeah, I just wanted to show you that. So it's kind of, you know, some people don't like the idea of using lost rented homes to pay for shared ownership homes, because ultimately you're switching, you know, the loss of a rented home for a shared ownership home. But yeah, I've put it back anyway. So we're back to Holmes England grant at 30,000 per home. That's got a net present value of 52,000. So in theory, the maximum grant you should get from Holmes England is what makes your MPV 0, you know. So I could, in theory, reduce that. If I'd reduce it to 29,000, the grant, my MPV is 36. I could probably go to 27, maybe. Yeah, so at 27,000, I'm making, you know, £3,000 kind of surplus in my prediction. So that would probably be the level of grant you'd go for. You could spend ages messing about with it, but if I dropped it to 2,650, I'm now making a loss here. Let me just make that red because I want to see the NPV in red. Or am I? Can't see red. That's better. Yeah, so that's making a loss. You know, so 26,500 is not enough. But I'll put it back to 30 where we were. But I want to see some of the difference in these assumptions here, because there's some really big ones here. One of them is staircasing. We said yes or no. If we're assuming there's no staircasing, and some people do assume there's no staircasing, the scheme makes a massive loss here, because we're not getting all this money in. You know, if I go down to the cash flow here, this staircasing receipt is empty. and we're not getting any money in. If we've got staircasing switched off, which I've just changed there, if I go to property inflation and change it to 10%, it's going to have no impact because, we're not getting any sales receipts. It doesn't matter. But it's quite useful to know that with staircasing, if you assume no, it doesn't work very well. Shared ownership, it doesn't perform that well compared to private sale. The only way it could work well without staircasing is if your interest rate or discount rate was lower than your rent, effectively. So if we could borrow money for 2%, like I've just changed it to, now we've got no staircasing and we're making a big profit, again bigger than private sale, because basically we're borrowing money at 2% and our rent is 2.75%. So you think you're borrowing 4.5 million at a rate of 2%, and you're getting a 2.75% rent based on a big amount. It would make a lot of money. And without staircasing, shared ownership kind of works or fails based on the difference between the rental percentage and your borrowing cost, or discount rate. If I was to put the borrowing cost up to 8%, and we have got someone now using 8%, it's making a massive loss. We're making a £2.2 million loss. So it's kind of showing that these assumptions are huge. I mean, everything I've changed so far hasn't touched this top box up here. We're still building exactly the same thing that's worth exactly the same amount with exactly the same rent, and it's costing us exactly the same amount. I haven't changed the grant. The MPV can switch between a 2.2 million loss at 8% to a £2 million profit here at 2%. So your cost of funding on shared ownership is like crucial to what you predict. Put it back to 6. So at the moment we're making a loss because I've turned staircasing off. I'm going to turn it back on. I want to kind of show you as well now, property inflation. I mean, in the last, I don't know, in London anyway, I'm not sure, I think it's pretty similar. House prices tend to go up pretty fast, and they have been going up pretty fast since the 60s. I'm not sure exactly what house prices is, but most people, house prices, some people say double every 10 years. House price inflation, and I have seen people model this, is near at 8%. If you put 8% property inflation in, I've just changed that here. I'll make that pink. Oh, I didn't make it pink. If we put property inflation to 8%, which you could assume, it's going up at that sort of level historically. I mean, it isn't maybe this year, next year, but it has been. If you assume that, you've got this huge profit here. And in theory, all of the RPs that have been building shared ownership since the 90s, I mean, I remember I used to work for London Quadrant in the 90s, and they had Tower Homes, which built loads of shared ownership. Their staircasing receipts probably went up by this amount of inflation, because inflation has been that high on average. And what happens is, if that does happen, you make all this extra money. Because if I look down the cash flow now, these staircasing receipts, they're huge. They're in the millions by the time you get down here in year 25, 30 and that. So house price inflation has a massive impact over the period of your staircasing. And what happens is, if house price inflation is high, it's almost better to sell less up front, because at the minute we're assuming we're going to sell 25%. If I reduce this from 25% to 10%, you might think it might look worse, but I'm guessing, I might have this wrong here, I've dropped it to 10. Yeah, the profit up here has gone up. So now it's making 6 million. At 25%, it was making 5 million. So if you kind of forecast your income stream to go up quite fast, then it's best to have it later than sooner. So this, some people think, oh, there's a reduced initial sale on shared ownership, it doesn't work anymore. Well, not necessarily, because you are still getting all your sales receipt if you assume staircasing. So yeah, you can push that back up to 25, and you'll see that the profits gone back to 5. What doesn't make much of a difference, and I'll just put this back to where it was. What doesn't make much of a difference is things like management cost. I've still got, why have I still got a huge, I need to change that to 3. Yeah, we're back to our 52,000 NPV. So, you know, a scheme that's just about working. The management cost of £100 a unit doesn't make much difference. If I double it, it's changed by 52 to -1. So it's changed by about 50,000, and there's 24 homes. So what's that, 2,000 per home by doubling that? It's not massive. So management cost on shared ownership don't really make much difference. And maintenance cost can only, if you think about it, if they're for 10 years, 10 years of £500 is £5,000 per home. So the maintenance contribution can probably only change your NPV by about 5,000 per home. I can take it out, and I've gone up by 100,000, which is there's 24 homes, so that's about 4,000 per home. The reason it was less than 5,000 is because you've got this, you know, this discount factor. You know, it's, over time it's less. Voids and bad debts make hardly any difference. I'll change that to, oops, change the wrong part. Hold on. This one here, if I change the 1% to 2, the NPV is 52, changes to 30. So doubling voids and bad debts makes very little difference. If I delete them all together, it's 74,000 instead of what it was 50. So again, voids and bad debts on shared ownership, not worth spending too much time on. The main ones that I think are property inflation. Cost inflation isn't that important because your costs are so low. It's property inflation. Rent inflation is important, and it's very important if you don't assume staircasing, because that's your only income stream. The staircasing start and finish year are not that important either. I think what's important in terms of viability is, are you assuming it, yes or no? If you do assume it, it doesn't matter massively when it happens. So if I change it to start in year 2 instead of year 6, the NPV just changed by a few thousand. You know, it changed by 30,000, so £1,000 per home. If I change it to year 10, it's still with, you know, still within this 100,000 range. So I would say staircasing start and finish year don't really make much difference. What does is there staircasing, yes or no? And if there is staircasing, are they staircasing to this, you know, 100%? So, excuse my doorbell. So yeah, that pink one, the staircasing ceiling. If I reduce it, it will start to look worse because I'm reducing the amount of future sales. So if I change it to 50%, that's you know, 950,000 drop in NPV. Because we didn't get half the money that, you know. So yeah, they're the big ones. I'm just anticipating a few questions on these assumptions about what people assume, because we have a assumptions benchmarking club where we can like report on people's assumptions against everyone else's, because our model we use, we've got a model people use to do this sort of stuff, and we've got their assumptions, and we anonymize them and that, but and measure them. But what people tend to do is pretty much everyone does assume staircasing. You have to be kind of very risk averse to assume that staircasing doesn't happen. Apparently, I mean, the main driver for staircasing is divorce. I always found that quite funny, but I think a lot of people buy shared ownership as young couples, and when if they get divorced, then they have to sell it, and if the value's gone up, they just staircase to 100% and buy it out. So that's apparently one of the things, and also upsizing and stuff like that. But there is a lot of staircasing, and I think there's not really published figures about it. People are see it as quite a commercial assumption. They don't tend to reveal what they have, but I think as a guide, it seems to be about 3% a year staircasing. So that's kind of similar to what we've got here. We've got 2.86 of the bit that the landlord owns. So somewhere around that, like 2-3%, maybe 4% a year gets sold. That seems to be the experience. If you wanted to make it a bit risk averse, some people just reduce the ceiling. So instead of assuming that it's all bought, they'll say, well, we'll assume that 20% of it isn't bought. I'm kind of getting to the end now. Just like with rented homes, it's quite sensitive to things, less so internal area. So with rented housing, I don't know if anyone was here yesterday, but if I push the size of this 2-bed flat up by 20 square meters to 90, my works cost here is going to jump. Right, so I've got 49595, and I press enter, and that's gone up by £1 million now because I'm building an oversized unit. It's too big. But the difference with this and rented homes is that if I push this up to 90, this market value in theory is going to go up, because properties are worth an amount per square foot. So like a 2-bed flat that's got, an ensuite bathroom and, a big separate living room and kitchen is probably worth more, so you don't get punished with shared ownership as much for building bigger units. I mean, you still wouldn't do it, but I think the consequences are less than doing it with rented homes. So, in theory, this amount of 330 is an amount per square foot, and it will go up. I mean, obviously, there's a ceiling in each area. You couldn't sell a 2-bed flat over a certain amount of money, but building bigger homes is sometimes even necessary to attract buyers. So I think that a difference with shared ownership is this internal area less crucial maybe, although still important. Circulation space is still dead space in shared ownership. So if you had, I mean, now MPV here is 52,000. If our circulation space was 30%, that's 200,000 in the red. So that's £250,000 on 24 units. So yeah, it's 10 grand a unit extra cost, because basically we've added 5% extra circulation, which is costing us an extra 10 grand a home, and you don't get nothing back for it. People aren't going to pay more for a shared ownership home because it's got a nice plant room on the roof, so the circulation space, I think, ideally should be efficient. I think we covered private sale, initial sale, going up or down. If you've got staircasing switched on, you might be surprised. Selling more upfront could actually make your scheme worse. Lowering the rent will always make your scheme worse. So if your rent goes down from 2.75, it will get worse. And I didn't really cover the calculations for it today because we don't have time, but there's an affordability calculation normally with shared ownership, and most people will want shared ownership to be affordable to people on local incomes. In London, the limit on household income in the London plan is 90,000. That sounds crazy, but if you're on 90,000, it assumes you probably could do with some help with housing costs, which is crazy. That must be everyone. So in London, if the income required is over 90,000 per year, then you'd have to reduce that rent. And then some councils have their own tighter criteria. So I've seen some councils say, well, it needs to be affordable to people on 40, 50,000 a year. And then you have to do like a mortgage calculation, which works out what's their mortgage outgoings and what's the rent. And effectively, you can't change the mortgage cost, but you can reduce your rent. So if, say, this was deemed unaffordable, this 2-bed flat, you might reduce that 2% down to 1.5%. And if I press enter now, you'll see this MPV over here. That's took off a huge amount. It's took off over 600,000 by reducing that rent. And that rent's now 3,700 a year. Whereas if I put it back, you see it was 6,800. So, reducing the rent is sometimes necessary, but it does hurt viability. I think probably, I don't know if I've got anything else to say. I'll just be rambling. I might maybe go, should we go to questions a bit early and I'll unshare?
Let's do that, Steve. Well, thank you very much for your very detailed building of the workshop. Thank you very much, or building of the model rather. So we'll now introduce Steve Sheen from our growth team. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Tom. Afternoon, everyone.
Hello. So there was quite a few questions that came up, and Steve B, as I'll call you, it might help to get the model back up, just to have a look at a few things. So there was one question about the staircasing percentage per annum cells, because I think they're labeled the same. So it's J15, J16. So I think perhaps a few people missed what the difference was between those two, and perhaps if you could just explain it again. I think at that point you did say this is where it gets complicated. So
I didn't know if I'd have time to finish the model, so I skipped it. Right, let me just add the labels.
Brilliant.
So if you think of it, if let's assume there's an easy way to do it. Let's assume people buy and sell it in year 6. So I've just changed it to year 6. You know, they're buying all of it in year 6. They would buy 75% of the whole home if they bought it in year 6, because they've already bought 25% up here. So that's what that first percentage is. It's the percentage of the whole home that they buy. But that is, they're buying 100% of the landlord's retained element. So because the landlord has 5.4 million of retained equity, and they're buying all of that. So that was the differences, really. It was just to help with the calculations in the cash flow. So yeah, they buy 75% of the whole property in year 6, which is the same as buying 100%. And if I put it to year 6 and 7, which is going to be over 2 years, it shows that they're buying 37% of the whole property in years, 6 and 7 there, and they've already bought 25 right at the beginning, and that comes to 100. Or looking at it from the landlord's perspective, they've sold half of what they retained and the other half the year after. So if that explains it, but it's only really relevant, these percentages, to actually make the model work. It's the one bit of the model that I think people probably fell asleep and left the call.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but it was just a bit where I think people could have done with a bit more explanation. But that's been really helpful. So we've got a question here about some of the borrowing. So this is for you, Steve B, again. It says, don't we need to make some allowance for the borrowing we will need to do against the sales revenue, which we will not have until we sell the units?
Yes. Okay. So basically, the way I built this model is it's kind of running this borrowing down here, our loan calculation. That's once the building's fully sold. What you would normally have in a development model, like in our one, or in like Powerman per hour, one of the alternative ones, is you would have a development cash flow, and within that cash flow, you would have a monthly amount of spend where you're building it. So you might buy your land cost in month 1 and then spread your works over like 12 months, and you'll get grant maybe a bit at the beginning, a bit at the end, and then you'll start to get some sales receipts. And you would normally add interest in a monthly basis through that period, and that's part of your cost. And in this model, where it says on cost here, that would be in there, and this model didn't calculate it, because if I had to build a monthly development cash flow, it would be a 3-hour call instead of 2. So that on cost there, that 1.6 mil includes an allowance for interest as you go and interest during the sales period. And that's where it would be.
That makes sense. So essentially, if you were doing this in a real life circumstance, you would have that extra layer of granular detail, either as part of an additional spreadsheet, or you'd be using a cash flow piece of software.
Yeah, I think it would be in the so all of the viability models, including our Optimix one, it has that. It has two cash flows. Like it has a short-term cash flow, which is like called development cash flow, and within that, that's what calculates this on cost in detail. You wouldn't typically, if you're really seriously going to do a scheme, just type in 30%. You'd want to itemize out what is surveys, what is legal fees, professional fees. Interest cost would be in there as well as contingency. And that cash flow is not in this model. What I put is the second one, which is this one that I built that's important to understanding how shared ownership assumptions and that make a scheme work. A development of like this part of the model, the development cash flow, would be exactly the same for rented and shared ownership, with the exception of maybe a sales period.
That's great. And I think that reiterates the point that we've been making throughout, which is, this is a simplified model with the intention of getting people to understand the different inputs and how they relate to one another and the importance of different assumptions, rather than it being something you can take away and using an application to a bank tomorrow. So that's really interesting. Got one for you, Steve S. So we've got a question about how the demand for shared ownership has changed, particularly in relation to recent increases in interest rates.
Yeah, no props. I think the interest in the product, in the shared ownership product, is still really, really high. We thought that might have been affected by sort of recent changes in the housing market, cost of living crisis and stuff. But the feedback that we've had from sort of lenders, agents and partners is that there's a different sort of cohort accessing shared ownership. So where people may have originally gone to purchase a property outright, they may not be able to be in that, or they're not in that position to do that. So they are sort of dropping down to have a look at shared ownership. So replacing some of the traditional shared ownership applicants. And again, that's why we need to think as Holmes England about varying that tenure across the areas that we're looking at, because obviously some of the people that were going to access shared ownership may need sort of rented accommodation at the moment. So that's what's been picked up in some of the previous sessions. But yeah, different cohort, but the demand is extremely high. And there's a number of lenders still in the market. I think there's 20 plus lenders that are lending on shared ownership properties nationally. And I think there was a question in the chat early on. It's probably just worth picking that up. They were saying, what's the average national or the national average for the initial tranche, the initial sales? I think that was running at about 40 to 41% from recent information that we've been given. But obviously that's an average, so you've got higher and lower depending on where you are in the country.
So is that initial share that the sort of owner/tenant purchases?
Yeah, based on what their income is, their financial circumstances, whether they're joint applicants. So yeah, that's that initial bit. Obviously, we can go as low as, with the new shared ownership model, go as low as a 10% share, but we're not seeing a great deal of activity at that rate. It's still, like I say, from like Steve's mentioned in the model, from 20-25% upwards. And obviously the national picture is around about 40-41% at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we've got a question here, which is probably a clarification. It's a bit of a long one, but it says, and this is for you, Steve B, a nice easy one for you. And it says, what happens to your I&E at the point of sale? At the moment, you are not assuming that the sale will secure a level of surplus, and you are reliant on the sales market and all sorts of other assumptions to not end up in a loss-making scenario. What's covering that risk? Oh,
that's an accounting question, I suppose. I don't know is the answer to that. I mean, I think you would typically, assuming it costs you the same amount to build as what it's worth, start from there. If it costs 200,000 to build a home worth 200,000, then in theory, when you have a sale, it's exactly equal to your cost in your accounts, and it's probably pretty neutral. But if it's costing you more to build than what it's worth, then if you sell it, in theory, you're selling it at a loss. And I'm not sure if there's a cost floor with shared ownership like there is on the right to buy. Like I think with right to buy, you can't sell a home for less than what it cost or the right to acquire. So you're protected in that sense, but I'm not sure with shared ownership. So if you like built a home now that was, costing you the same as it cost to build, and say property values fall, are you at risk of like an impairment? I don't know. Maybe there is some risk there. I'm not sure if there's a protection in the lease because I've never really looked at that. But to be honest, people don't tend to. I've not seen any concern about that because people tend not to assume staircase until at least sort of 5 years. And normally in 5 years, the value of the property is going to have gone up. And for that reason, your cost in your accounts, I think, get depreciated, or part of them do. So you're probably okay. But yeah, I don't know the accounting treatment. I mean, these models are really to make the decision: should we build shared ownership or not? Does it on paper pay for itself? So yeah, I'm not sure.
No, I mean, it was a bit of a curveball, so we appreciate you having a stab at that. I mean, in terms of the key hurdles then that you might want to consider, then you mentioned the net present value hurdle in terms of it. Are there any others that you would look at typically?
Yeah, I mean, I'll reshare, and just if you want, I can just spend if there's time,
we've got 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah,
just to cover that off.
Let me quickly add in another hurdle and a couple of hurdles. So
I think that really sort of interests people is how are we judging all of this?
But there's a couple more. So the cost of value hurdle is, I've kind of already done it really. It's what's it cost. So this is the 711 compared to what's it worth, which is the 722. So if I put that in, you've got this hurdle. Is our cost, less than our value? What I can do is I'll just do what I did yesterday, and this is going to look a bit messy, but I'll have a hurdle and a actual and a pass fail, and we'll add in an IRR as well. Hurdle, actual, and then we'll have a pass fail, and we make some traffic light kind of thing here. So what we have for MPV, most people will want the MPV and shared ownership to be positive. I've even seen people want it to be quite strongly positive, up to an amount. So there'll be a pass-fail thing here. So what you would have for MPV is if the MPV is higher or equal to the hurdle, then you'd say it was a pass. And if not, you would say it was a fail. So that's that hurdle. And I'll do what I did yesterday. I'm just going to put some format in to make this go green or red. So I'll say if it says pass, so this is just a formatting thing. If that cell says pass, you'll have this in our model's got green and reds all over it because it's all pass and fails. If it passes, that's a pass. It's the hurdle is 0, so we want to make a surplus, and the actual is 52, so it's a pass. But let me add in another format there. So again, if it contains the word fail, I'd want it to go red. I'll just put that in as well. So some people might say we want to make a £10,000 surplus for every shared ownership home because it's risky. Staircasing is a risky business. Why not get the money? Property inflation might be less. So if they said that, they might have a hurdle. I'll put it in here for MPV of 10,000 per home. So I'll put 10,000 and multiplied it by 24. If they've got this case, this scheme suddenly doesn't work for that organisation because it's a fail. You need to have an MPV of 240,000 and it fails. You'd also have people with a test on cost of value. And I've seen this is quite common, although people can't afford to do this so much now. They'll say, we want the cost to be 95% of the value. We want to be able to build this cheaper than what it's worth. And I just need to change the sign. And the one we've got is 99%. And if this hurdle, this cost of value hurdle, has got nothing to do with the rents, You could take the rents out. You could take all the staircasing out. What it's comparing, if we looked at it earlier, it's like a private sale test. Is this building worth more than what it's costing us? Historically, that used to be like 90%, this cost of value for shared ownership. So that's another test. So in this example, we'd fail it, but people want their schemes to work, and they'll end up with 0 MPV being acceptable and a cost of value of 100 or less. So you would pass both. The last one is IRR. Got a bit of time to put this in. So an IRR is what is the maximum cost of borrowing that you could afford for the scheme to work. And I'd very quickly build an IRR cash flow because it only takes 2 seconds. I'll do it over here. What you do with an IRR is you start with the borrowing in year 0, which is this 4592. I knew that was I think it's C20. Yeah, we start with that, and then we have our income coming in, which is this one in green. But I just need to put in a formula to stop the income at the cash flow length. So what I want to say is if the year is less than or equal to my Excel's playing up here. All right, let me do that again. Equals year, which is year 1, is less than or equal to the cash flow period. So in our assumptions, we're saying it's a 40-year model. If it's less than that, then put the rent in, and if not, don't. So I just drag this down. All this is going to do is put our rent in, but it's going to stop it at year 40, which it stops at anyway, to be honest, because there's it's all staircase by then. And the IRR, if I just highlight this column, I'll just put this in now. It won't be exactly 6.07. But going back to our table here, I'll just put this in and now I can talk through it. This is what a private. So if there's any for-profit kind of people on the call, this will be their test. So there'll be a hurdle rate. So they may say, well, we need to make a 4% return per year on average for this to work, and this scheme makes a 6.07 return. So that works, for them. That this scheme would work because they're making 2% more than what their cost of funds is. This 4%, and that will be a test that If the good thing with IRR as a test is it kind of is related on how much return you need to make on your money, and if you're doing stuff for profit, MPV is not really much use on its own because I'm making 52,000. People say, well, what does that mean? And it's what's that as a percentage? And you can't just divide it by your cost as a percentage because it's you've got to wait 40 years to get this MPV. This is what people forget with shared ownership. In this, I'll really just quickly show something. If I put property inflation up just to show this, over here I've got private sale and shared ownership, and shared ownership's got a bigger MPV than private sale. But if you was a private developer, you would still do private sale, because what people forget with MPVs is that this shared ownership MPV takes 40 years to get. This private sale you can get in a year if you build the scheme in a year. So you could do in 40 years 40 of these 100,000 schemes, because you do 40 schemes, you do one every year. Whereas if you did this for shared ownership as a developer, you've used your money, you've got to wait 40 years to get it back. So it's as a yearly return, IRR is quite useful. But yeah, they're the test. There's only them 3 really. There's not really many more.
That's really helpful. I think one final question for Steve S is, if any of the partners on the call wondering about, how they approach this in terms of their applications to you, I assume, we've got an open door in terms of discussing these matters and working with partners.
I think like we've mentioned on the previous sessions, Tom, there'll be growth managers, depending on what part of the country you're operating in. There'll be a growth manager that covers your area. If there's anything that you've got concerns about, or you just want to talk through before you actually submit an application, or talk through some of the some of the questions that have been raised today, just feel free. We do have an open door policy, and we're more than willing to sort of work with you to build up the schemes to make sure that you've got a viable and deliverable scheme that's going to work for your organisation, and it's going to fit within the parameters of the affordable housing programme. So yeah, more than willing to sort of consider that and talk through.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So if we could get the slides back up, we'll just wrap this one up. So yes, so these are the take-home messages, and we've got some wider learning resources as well, which we can point you towards. And when you get the spreadsheet, rather when you get the slides and the spreadsheet, you'll be able to access these links. Just in terms of the top tips that we've that have come out of today's workshop, I think the staircasing assumptions are clearly critical. I think it's clear that they have a real big impact in terms of the viability. So it's important to understand these and the risk to your organisation if it doesn't happen as predicted. So make sure that you sensitivity test those on the basis of past experience and other comparables. House price inflation also is an additional assumption. It's not normally relevant to the NPV in rented tenures, so that is worthwhile considering, particularly given the fluctuations in the housing market currently. And affordability as well as marketability are important considerations, particularly if you're looking to staircase. And then finally, get agreement. So it's important to have a formally agreed set of financial assumptions to assess scheme viability. And that goes back to what Steve S. was saying as well about how we can help in terms of firming those up and making sure they're appropriate, particularly for our capital funding program. So yes, the links are on the screen, but you'll get those when you get the slides. Next screen, or next slide rather. So I think this is it for today. There's been a few rounds of applause already, but I'd just really like to thank you all for your time and for attending today's session. Bit of a long one, as you'd expect, but there's a lot of detail in there, and I think, you know, having both the Steve's expertise in this particularly complicated matter has been a real benefit to the session. So thank you very much to the two Steves. All that's left to do is to once again thank you for attending, and thanks for your attention today. All right, cheerio, goodbye.